Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us for Vintage Books Live tonight. I'm Christy Peterson, and tonight I'm here with Ellie Alexander. Ellie Alexander is a repeat visitor, so that's always fun and also intimidating for me because I'm like not intimidating, that's the wrong word. It makes me I have to think because I have to think, okay, what did we talk about last time? And of course, I won't remember. So I'll probably ask her some of the same questions that we did last time, but we did talk about maybe some different stuff that we could talk about. So we will. But first, I would like her to share about her brand new book, which just came out today, called A Smoking Bun. So if you could just, the
So
puns are
bad.
great.
So bad.
Um,
Chef's kiss. Yeah.
I think honestly that's one of the things that I love about Cozy Mysteries is that so many of them have very punny covers and or very punny titles, and it's really fun. It just kind of sort of captures the fun vibe of the whole genre to have those kind
Exactly.
of titles. So if you could just tell us a little bit about the newest book.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I agree with the titles too, because it also is an indicator of what you're going to get, right? You're
Yeah,
not
yeah.
reading War and Peace or something that's
Exactly,
super
exactly.
heavy. If you pick up A Smoking Bun. This is the 18th book in the series, which is
Wow.
just mind-blowing to me. And it is set on the slopes of Mount Ashland, which is a real gorgeous, beautiful mountain in Southern Oregon. And Jules and the team are trekking out on a moonlight snowshoe tour, and she's making delicious chickpea stuffed buns and
Ooh.
chai spice cookies and spiked hot chocolate to bring for this bonfire. And something, there's some nefarious things afoot on the mountain while all this beautiful, cozy starlight snowshoeing is happening. And then the next day, she returns for the downhill dummy event, which is an event where the entire community puts together these homemade contraptions and send them hurling down the ski slope, trying to catch big air. And I don't know, something could go terribly wrong there too. We'll have to
I
see.
can't imagine what it could
I
be.
can't. I know exactly.
Um, can you tell a little bit of the story that you told me of, or you told us at the store event about the editor and the whole the event and everything?
Yes. Yes. So the way that editing works in publishing, we talked that maybe we'd talk a little bit about publishing tonight too, because like you said,
Yeah, yeah.
we did a lot of like book stuff last time. So the way the publishing process works is first my editor reads the first round of the manuscript and provides feedback. That's more a structural editorial edit. So she'll provide lots of notes and thoughts on how to strengthen it or where something, might need a touch more coziness or maybe like a little backstory about one of the characters, that sort of thing. And then it goes through other iterations with the last step being copy editors. And copy editors are wonderful because they're meticulous at finding
Yes.
grammatical errors. They're great fact checkers, all of those things, but they don't often provide editorial, like plot
Yeah.
points, those sort
Yeah.
of things, unless there's like a gaping hole that everybody else has missed. But the copy editor for this one at the bottom of the note said, this concept of a downhill dummy is so absolutely unbelievable. It's just over the top, even for a cozy, even for something that's called a smoking bun. It's just way too unbelievable. So I would suggest that you just cut that entire storyline and leave it out. And I was like, it's real. It's the realest thing in the book. Like I went to the downhill dummy on Mount Ashland. That was my inspiration. So immediately I like searched through my photos and sent them off. And yeah, pretty funny.
Yeah.
I mean, it
I
does
just
seem
love that because
outlandish.
yeah. Well, I remember sitting at a table at a conference one time and there were some editors sitting at a table behind um and there was a discussion about whether snipes were real.
Oh,
And it makes me laugh because like publishing is centered, at least for US publishing, is centered in New York City. It's not as is not quite as concentrated as it used to be. There's some publishers in other parts of the country. And then of course there's all the sub houses of houses that are in other parts of the country, but it's still fairly concentrated in New York City. So you get a lot of young, 20, 30 something editors in New York City who maybe are mostly city kids who haven't really been out in the world very much. And so we were chuckling because it was like, no, that's actually a real
Yeah,
thing.
that's exactly.
So, but I love that sometimes you're like, no, that can't be real. And
Right. I mean,
but
I didn't necessarily blame her, right? Because it
yeah,
does
yeah.
seem like so ridiculous and over the top. But I was like, no, wait, I promise you, I've got the receipts.
We'll
I've
send
come
you
prepared.
pictures.
Yeah, exactly.
Uh,
Uh,
so what is like, are there things I'm trying to think. I don't want to give anything away about this book, but also not too much away about the series if somebody's a little bit earlier. But
right.
you've had this Jules. I mean, Jules has been a character in your life for a while now.
Yeah.
Can you kind of like catch people up on like her backstory and where you started with her at the beginning?
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting to reflect. And I'm actually working on book 20 right now because you're always writing ahead. And she's been with me for 20 books now. And
Yeah.
like anyone else in the world, she's growing and changing and evolving, which I love as a writer. But I was just thinking, I sort of want to go back and reread my notes that I had on her when I first was sketching her
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
Because when we first meet her, she's sort of this forlorn, her name is Juliet Montague Capshaw, so she feels like she's destined
She's destined
to.
to end up in Ashland.
Yes, exactly. And perhaps never find love. And there are a lot of themes of loss and grief because I was tapping into my own. I had lost my mom at that time when I was writing the book. And so now, kind of in hindsight, reflecting and seeing where she's coming, she's sort of like standing in her power and she's created this little empire in
Yeah.
Ashland. So it's really fun and that's all, a lot of that has happened organically. It wasn't all planned. I planned
Yeah.
her
Yeah.
initial arc, but a lot of
Right.
the
Right.
stuff that happened later, it just flows, like once you
Yeah.
start to get
Yeah.
into a story.
So, do you have like when you've been in a series this long, do you have like an end point that you have in your head, or do you just plan to keep going until you don't have any more ideas anymore?
I know. I don't have a firm endpoint. I have some arcs that are wrapping up.
Yeah.
And I have sort of a new direction that I'm sending her. Um, but it's hard because I'm so attached to the characters that the
Yeah.
thought
Yeah.
of wrapping the series is like that's heartbreaking.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you get to like 20 plus books, at some point in time, I just wonder like if readers will be done with Ashland and
Yeah.
Wilson.
I don't, yeah, I don't think so. Like, I feel like readers, I don't know. As a reader for me, I'm always like a little melancholy when I finish a series because you feel like you've gotten to know the characters and they're part of your life. I don't know, books are just part of your life in a way that nothing else really is.
Yeah,
And so um I suspect that I think that's in some ways what's so comforting about cozies is they're this spot of light in the world when things aren't always easy and you have a character that you know and you have a you're good everything's gonna get tied up at the end and I think it's the same reason why some of us really like episodic television because it's like okay but the problem's gonna be solved in an hour and yay isn't that
it's all gonna be
great?
packaged in a neat bow. Yeah, uh-huh.
So, but
Yeah,
yeah, no, I just would imagine that as a writer, that's an odd thing to grapple with a little bit.
I know. Yeah, it is hard. And at this point in time, I still have ideas, I still have enthusiasm for the series. Some of the other series that I've written, it's interesting because this series it's had smaller subplots, just more about like individual arcs and stuff. But some of the other series writing that I've done has had like a secondary mystery, a bigger murder to solve. And once those have wrapped up, then it feels like a more natural ending to
Yeah,
something.
yeah,
And this is more ethereal, I guess.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But if
No,
it
I
gets to the
think
point
as
where
long as you love it, I think honestly what it boils down to is as long as you love it and the readers love it, why not, you
yeah,
know, why not keep going? Um, but you have stuff that is new. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
sure, yeah. I have a new series that's coming out in June. And this one has a secondary subplot and a double murder. And I just love that challenge as a writer because I have to wrap my brain around, like you're saying, an episodic television show where the first murder has to be all wrapped up
Yeah,
neat and tidy. But the bigger arc of this secondary murder is going to have to stretch over a few books. So, like, what details do I weave into book one? What go into two? What go into three? This series is going to be set in an Agatha Christie inspired bookstore in Northern California. And it's going to feature a character named Annie Murray, who was a criminology student who thought that she was going to either open her own detective agency or work in the criminal justice system in some way, shape, or form. But the day before graduation, her best friend is murdered. Um, and that just sends her on this other path. So she ends up working at the Secret Bookcase, this bookstore in Northern California. And 10 years later, she puts on a mystery festival for the town to try to revive and bring some energy into town and into the bookstore. Something we can relate to, right? And people in a bookstore, yes, 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 yes. Go to your local bookstores. And her college student or her college classmates show up and it reignites a modern day murder and also this murder from the past that she has not been able to let go of.
I'm excited. Somebody
Me.
just said in chat, very excited for this series and the fact that June feels very far away. I'm
I know,
guessing
right?
I'm
But
guessing it doesn't feel as far away to you as it does to your readers.
right, totally. The two books, the first two books are going to release in June too, which is so
Oh,
fun.
wow.
Yeah.
Okay. That's an interesting way of doing it. Is that just
Yes.
to a specific publisher or?
Yeah, this is a new publisher who I'm working with, and they are really cutting edge in terms of paying attention to the market. So they have a totally different model of release. The first two books, like a episodic TV show where you get
Yeah,
the first
yeah.
few, come out together, and then book three will come out in October. So there's a
Oh,
really
wow.
tight
Wow.
deadline, and
How?
audio
Oh,
comes
go
out at
ahead.
the same
Sorry.
time. Oh no,
Oh, I love that.
me too.
Yeah. No, I do love that. What, how does that impact you on the writing level though? Because that's a lot. Did you do you do you get longer lead time to work on it because it's such a tight release schedule when it actually is all going to happen?
No, in fact, the opposite.
I figured.
Yeah, I wish. Yeah. And I agreed to it. They were so great. We went back and forth and they're like, "Are you sure about these?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, no problem." And then I got into writing the first one and I was like,
Yeah, I've done that to myself
"Oh,
before.
what have I done?" Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I suppose in some ways, as long as it's not too tight of a timeline, the fact that you're writing them together can help you keep things straight. But that's still a lot of words to put down on a page in a short amount of time. So,
It's a lot of words in a short amount of time. You nailed that on the coffin. But historically, I've written stuff that's more like you're delivering every 6 months or once a
yeah,
year. And I'm going back and forth between series. So it's been fascinating to write three books basically back to back to back to back, which I have never done in my career thus far.
yeah, yeah,
And I don't know if it's part of it is just because of where I'm at, with like muscle memory, But
Yeah.
your point of like, I have been fully in this world and remembering things in way, it's been a lot easier, I would say,
Yeah. Yeah.
to stay in that world, which I wasn't anticipating.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, because it's a different, like, again, I'm coming from it from such a different angle, like writing shorter books for kids. And, we would have, it wasn't atypical for me to have a 4 to 6 week turnaround
Wow.
time.
Yeah.
But which isn't easy, but also you're writing, 3,000 words total, not a whole novel. So,
Sure. But still,
it's a different process. But even then, sometimes you're like, oh my gosh, this
what
is
have I
very
done?
quick.
Yeah.
So, and then do the first three books come out two together and then one in rapid succession? Then are there more coming after that, but just a longer timeline? Or is that just they do that and they see how it goes and then you see?
Yeah, they bought in a 3 book contract,
Gotcha.
which is pretty standard. I have an arc at least through book 5 of where I want this
Yeah.
subplot to
Yeah.
go. So I'm hoping that they'll buy 2
Yeah. Yeah.
after.
And do they, you said this was a newer publisher. Do they do like, you said they did print audio. Do they do, I assume they do ebook as
Mhm.
well?
Yeah,
That's very cool.
I
Yeah.
know. Yeah. And all at once, this nice
Yeah.
bundle. Yeah. And it's also a much more collaborative process with my editor than I've ever had. Um, we have like these Zoom, she's in England, so we have these Zoom
Yeah.
tea sessions.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
yeah, which I've never had either. And it's been great to get kind of high level feedback as I'm working on something.
Oh, that would be awesome.
It's
Oh
a
my gosh.
it's
That would
such a
be so
gift.
awesome.
It almost makes me want to tear up because I'm like,
Yes.
oh my gosh,
Yeah.
it's like a
Yeah.
partnership. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, because I think a lot of times, I don't know if you experience this in fiction, but I know for me, a lot of the times there would be times where I'm just like, this is where I am, and I don't have the capacity right now to make this better.
Yes.
But I know that it needs to be better,
And it
and
can be
I just
better.
need somebody else to look at it and say, here's what I see, because usually that then breaks through the mire of, oh, okay, now I see, and then you can go. But you don't have, if you don't, usually it's like you send it in and you wait 6 weeks or however long it is on your end, and you're waiting for the feedback. And then, so that immediate sort of back and forth would be amazing.
It's such a game changer. Yeah. And same thing. And usually what I'm sending in would be a pretty, like, a pretty completed,
Yeah,
polished
yeah.
manuscript. But I'm sending in basically my first draft that's just a bit of a mess, but the bones of the story are
Yeah,
there. And
yeah.
then getting these notes of like, ooh, okay, like how about this or how about this? And
Oh,
then
that's awesome.
it just enhances your own creative
Yeah,
process.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm sure every writer is different. I'm sure there are some people for whom that would not be helpful because they're not ready for someone else to be into their head yet. But for me, I always enjoy the process of, oh yeah, okay. And I don't know, editors always make things better. So
Yeah. Or there's just like having an outside set of eyes to be able to
yeah,
pick up
yeah,
on something where, to your point, where you can feel that you're at the guts of something, but you can't quite grasp it, and somebody else's note can make you go, oh yeah, okay,
yeah,
that's where I want to go with
yeah.
this.
And
Yeah.
then you're off to the races again until
Yes.
you hit that next thing of, okay. But yeah, no, that is really interesting. I think that's one thing that's, we can segue over. We do have a question, don't let me forget, from somebody that doesn't quite fit into what we're talking now, but I want
Okay.
to make sure I don't forget about it later. Um, that, we talked about when you were in the store about maybe talking a little bit about publishing a little bit. And I'm wondering what you're different, because you've worked with more than one publisher, and you've also self-published, which is becoming more and more typical now, I think, for many authors, because maybe they'll have work that just isn't like commercially viable, but it's still a good book that that the fans are going to want. How have you noticed it, like, oh, I'm just thinking about how to articulate this in a way that makes sense. But like the breadth of the publishing experience that you have, what are some things that you've like taking away from like how publishing is changing and how publishing has been like good experience, not so good, and just some interesting things that you've come across along the way.
Yeah, all of the above, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, so much of it is the editor, I think, if you're with a house. And I've been fortunate in having good editors. I would say this new editor is by far the most feedback I've ever received in
Yeah.
the entire process. And for me, I love that. There have been many books where my editorial letter is like a paragraph, like, "Oh, I loved
Yeah.
it," where
Yeah.
you're like, oh, okay,
Yeah, that's
like
not
help me make it
actually very
better.
helpful.
I
Yeah.
know, like you might, I think somebody who's new to writing might be like, oh, that's great, but it's not really because we
Yeah.
want our writing to grow. Um, but so there's that. I think, when I started in early 2010, I guess, is when I was really like working on my first mystery. There was such a stigma against independent publishing.
Yes. Yeah.
And I feel like that has shifted dramatically,
Yeah.
which is fantastic. And I'm a believer that we all should be
Yeah.
writing, and any stories
Yeah.
that we are putting
Yeah.
out into the world is a good
Yeah.
thing. Um, but I think, and I think sometimes, and one of the reasons that independent publishing is having a moment and really taking off is because the big houses are these giant machines, right? They're
Yeah.
big
Yeah.
companies. And so it's a little bit like, moving a dinosaur
Mhm.
to plug along. So, you're like we were saying, like at my first house, books were coming out 18 months apart. Whereas in independent space, an author might be cranking out a chapter a day in,
Yeah. Yeah.
like one of the new serial platforms, or a book every month or two. So I find that interesting, and like what's the balance point in the middle for me as a writer. I think also watching kind of the trends that are shifting in terms of reader interest, that historically things have been much more tightly put in boxes, so it's like,
Yeah.
oh, you're writing a cozy mystery and that should involve baking and cats and go only here in mass market in this size. But there's so many just awesome like mashups, romantasy, fantasy, cozies, like um,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
I think that has all been born out of independent space. And suddenly publishing houses are like, oh, wait a minute, this is doing really well. Like,
Yes,
uh,
exactly.
how do
Yeah.
we jump on board? So yeah, I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how the landscape continues to shift
Yeah.
as readers shift and the way readers want to read. Audiobooks are just thriving.
Yeah.
And
Which
historically,
I'm thrilled to see that
me
because
too.
there's I
Oh,
think the gatekeepers are like, well, that's not really reading. And it's like,
not
well,
true at
yes, it
all.
is,
It is
because you're
100%
still
reading.
taking in the story into your brain. It's quite frankly saying that is pretty ableist because not everybody can read.
Exactly.
Um, and so
And that's how
I'm
stories
loving to
started,
see
right?
that.
Around a
Yeah.
campfire. We had
Yeah.
storytellers.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Um, I think it's really interesting. It's been really interesting to me to see the book selling part of it, like to
Yeah.
geek out over that part of it as opposed to the other side, which I was in for years before that. And it really is, I love the big publishers and I love the muscle that they bring to bring books and stories to more people, and the fact that they have the capacity to have such a broad outreach. But I do think that independent publishing has pushed those boundaries. And I think the other fun thing that I'm seeing is people who are willing to take on the roles. Like if you're willing to sit down and go, okay, well, what does a publisher do? They edit, they design, they
Mhm.
do all these things, and they're able to research and do a good job. That there we have the capacity with self-publishing to put out books that are of equal quality.
Absolutely.
to anything that's coming out from a traditional publisher now, which I think is really exciting. Because it is allowing people to do different. I mean, you have a series or you have a book that you self-published. I guess jump in, talk about that a little bit. Like
Yeah, yeah.
what made you decide that that particular book needed to be something that you did instead of maybe handing it off to a publisher?
Yeah, I this is a book that came to me in the pandemic. Like I literally woke up from a dream with it felt like a download. Like,
Yeah,
okay. And I wrote it and I had already been wanting to dive into that space because one of the gifts of writing for a while is I've been able to grow a readership. And
yeah,
so
yeah,
I think you're seeing a lot of authors go, well, wait a minute,
yes,
I can
yeah,
have a lot more control, creative license. Like I have a vision for this story. This story didn't fit into like my mystery world either. So sometimes like contractually speaking,
yes,
you're
yeah,
obligated to keep writing, right?
yeah, yeah,
For a certain set of books. And so I loved having the process of getting to find my own editors, and that was amazing too because I'm
yeah,
paying
yeah,
somebody myself, so like I'm going to hire somebody who is going to really work with me to build the story. I got to hire a local friend who's an artist to design the cover art, to go through that whole process. um, I really want to do a lot more in indie space. And I have 3 or 4 manuscripts that are just sitting in my
yeah.
drawer, like waiting for time.
For for when you don't have 3 books in a row coming out, for
I
whatever.
know.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and there's truth. Like you have to, it's a lot of work to independently publish too, like,
yeah,
because you
it
do
is.
have to check all of those boxes, right?
Yeah.
But
Because I do have people in that space who don't
right.
do all those things.
Sure.
They sort of throw something together and throw it up there, and then they bring it into the store, and it's like,
It's not ready.
and it's honestly the hardest part of my job because I never want to turn anybody away because quite frankly, anybody who, has the tenacity to put words on a page and stick with it is is should be commended for that. I think what people don't understand is writing, you're a writer if you write.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like you don't need any license to call yourself a writer. If you're writing, you're a writer. But once you enter the commercial space, that's a different animal. So, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, if you're writing family history for yourself, that's just as valid of writing as, I want to publish this novel. But as soon as you enter the publishing space to sell to other people, there are things that you have to pay attention to that you don't have to do if you're just doing it for yourself.
Yes.
And I do have people who don't do that and come in, and it's like it's not that your writing is invalid. It's just that in the selling space, this isn't gonna be, I'm not gonna be able to sell this. And so yeah, it's a space where I feel like I want more people to play in, but they definitely have to do their homework.
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
And there's that distinction, like storytelling and writing,
yeah,
as an art. And I agree 100% that writing is writing. Like there's no like
yeah,
differentiating point. But then when you're shifting into, no, I'm approaching this from my professional perspective, like, and I'm entering commercial space, you have to check boxes and yeah,
yeah, yeah.
have
I'm
hired
actually,
editors.
this is where a good spot to put that
Good.
question that
Yeah.
that that Tish asked is,
Hi, Tish.
um, she asked, when you first started writing, how did you deal with imposter syndrome?
Mm.
And do you ever face that still, even though you're 20 books into the Bakeshop Mystery series? And I think just imposter syndrome in general is a very valid and interesting discussion for anybody in the creative space. So I'm curious to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think even like starting this new series, I'm like, I don't know how to do this. Like, wait.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then
Oh,
I
yeah.
take back my power. I'm like, yes, you do. So I feel like imposter syndrome is the same part of my brain space as like my internal editor. And I've gotten really good at turning that internal editor off when I'm creating because
Yeah.
I don't need that headspace for creation, right?
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you're in the flow and you're writing and you're with your characters, you're embodying that world. I turn that editor back on when I'm fine tuning a book.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think I've learned to approach it from that lens of like, yep, every time I put a new book out, I think like, oh, this is going to be the one where readers are like, oh, she should call it. It's done. Like,
Yeah.
I do. I wrestle
Yeah.
with that. This
Yeah.
morning,
No,
I'm
I'm
like,
laughing because I totally relate to that. It's like I literally would sit down with every new book and be like, I don't remember how to do this.
yeah, right.
How do I
Yes.
do this?
I know.
And once I would get into it, it'd be like, oh, okay, yeah, I remember now. But literally every single time, I'm like, what makes me think that I can do this? And I think, again, it does. There is a certain amount of muscle memory um, that's involved. Uh,
Yeah.
but I think, I mean, I'm in the position right now of like moving to play in a new space, and then it comes all back all over again because it's like, well, I haven't written these kind of books before. Can I even really do this? And so, I don't think it ever goes away. I think it just pops up in different places than maybe it would have right at the beginning. I mean, it took me years to be able to say that I was a writer and not feel weird about it.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I totally agree. Yeah, I think it's just learning like that whole adage of feel the fear and do it anyway. Like I hear you. I hear you,
yeah,
imposter syndrome. I know. But I'm gonna keep doing it.
yeah, yeah,
Um, one of the other things, and this is just like a brain trick that I do is when I have those negative loops, I'll try to flip it and be like, ask myself questions and make my brain work on that problem. Like, well, what if everybody loved this one? What if, what if I'm supposed to be a writer? What if I have a story to tell? What if there are readers who are gonna tish? Like, what if there are readers who need to hear my story? What, like,
yeah,
um,
yeah,
but I would love to meet somebody for whom they have no imposter syndrome. Like,
yeah.
I will bow down to that person because even
I don't know if that would be a good thing though.
I
You
don't
know
think
what
so
I
either.
mean?
I think
I just kind of feel like if you're the kind of person that doesn't have imposter syndrome, you kind of scare me.
do
I'm
you
like,
have
and not in
self-awareness
a good way.
then?
It's like
Yeah.
I think imposter syndrome is kind of helps keep you humble too and makes you remember that, yeah, I mean, hopefully it will be good. Maybe it won't be, but that doesn't mean the next one isn't going to be the best thing you ever wrote?
Right.
So you just
Yeah.
keep going.
Or like with
But
sitting down to work on Bakeshop 20, I'm like, I am not going to have any new possible way to describe a pastry. Like,
oh,
nope.
I didn't think about that. Yeah, that would be
Crap. Okay. So like, yeah, that's always a
yeah,
struggle.
yeah. Um, I'm jumping because you talked about pastries,
Yeah.
and I saw your post today about recipes.
Yes.
You talk about that a little bit. Is it going to be like a cookbook that people can actually like download or
No,
whatever?
no. I
Oh,
mean,
you're
like
just
at some point,
imagining.
yeah, I would love to do a cookbook at some point, but from publishing, like that's its own
Yes.
beast.
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure.
And I am not a professional chef, so we would have to hire like an actual, although I do have a good friend, Chrissy, not Christy, but Chrissy from Tier, who I would love to. She's the inspiration for Jules baking from the start. But you'd have to have a professional chef and a food
Yes,
stylist and
yes,
the sets and all of that.
yeah,
At some point, maybe when the bake shop
yeah.
ends,
Oh, that
then
would be fun.
then I
Because you
could,
do have recipes in the back of the books
yeah,
usually, right? I mean,
definitely.
honestly, even just collecting those into one space would be kind of fun.
That's true.
Like as a download for people or whatever would be kind of cool. But yeah, no, I saw that post today. If you all are wondering what I'm talking about, if you follow Ellie Alexander on Instagram, are you on Facebook as well?
Uh-huh, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. And she made a post talking about like what's your favorite thing that from the Bakeshop Mysteries, what's your favorite like recipe or things that they talk about cooking in the I was like, oh, that's a good one. That would be fun.
Sweet,
So
savory coffee. Yeah.
and save I like the idea of doing that as a when it does close up someday
Yeah.
there's a celebration book bake shop, recipe collection for celebrating.
Mhm.
That'd be cool.
I would just want them to look like how I envision them in my mind,
Yes.
you
Yeah.
know, like which is not
Yeah.
always what
Yeah.
I can do in the kitchen. It might taste good, but
Yeah, exactly. I'm just peeking over here at chat to see.
sure.
Somebody said they love Lost Coast Literary.
Oh, thank you.
Uh, so I'm just trying to think of what um oh, here's a good question. So you, and for those of you who don't know, I mean, I'm guessing a lot of people who are watching right now who will come and watch later do know that Ellie was in Vancouver, which is why we claim her as ours, even though she's not living here anymore. And then was in Ashland and now is in the San Francisco area. Um, and you're the I think the first mystery, wasn't it set in like Clark County area, and
Yeah.
then you did Leavenworth and Ashland, and now you're doing California. Like, is that how do I word this so it makes sense? Is location that you can access and like be a part of an important part of your creative process?
Yes. Yes. I um I don't see pictures in my head at all.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Uh,
don't either.
what's the word for it? Thank you,
I don't
TikTok.
know. There is a word for it, but yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
aphantasia, something like that, right? Um, like literally. So are you the same?
Yeah.
Like I see
Yeah.
nothing. I
Yeah.
got nothing. It's
Yeah.
all
I mean, vague sort of the best I can do is like vague sort of impressionist fuzziness sort of.
okay.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Um, so I've always been an auditory and kinesthetic learner. Um, and so visually, and like sensory, like I need to immerse myself into a place to be able to describe it, to be able to bring it to life. So I don't think I'm ever the kind of writer who could write like a space odyssey or
Yeah.
some kind of fantasy where I had to fully create and imagine a world that I'm not living in some
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. That's so
And
fascinating because I'm the exact same way.
are you? Yeah.
Yeah.
I love to
I
read
finally
that.
realized I finally realized that that is one of the reasons why I struggle with a lot of like 19th century writing,
Yeah.
is that they'll go on and on and on and on about, because of course you didn't have that reference point of something you'd seen on TV or whatever. Like authors can have a lot of visual shortcuts nowadays because we've seen a cheetah or an elephant, and or we've seen pictures of the Taj Mahal or whatever. So we don't necessarily need as much of the visual. Whereas I think back then that was a part of immersing yourself in the world, was all those detailed descriptions, so that because you wouldn't have known what it looked like. But
Right.
I really struggle with that because I can't visualize what the author is saying, and I'm just like, get to the story already. I can't see
Yes,
the
I need
story.
plot. Yeah, yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah.
But
But
yeah,
then from the flip side, from the writing lens, I think, having this weakness in terms of my visual capabilities is actually an asset to my writing. And what I hear from readers so much is like, oh, you brought it to life.
yeah, yeah,
I feel like I was in Ashland, but I have to be in Ashland and walk through those
yes,
places.
yes, yeah,
Even
yeah,
this new series, it's a fictional town, but it's all based on real places here that I'm like mashing
yeah,
together.
yeah. I love that. No, I think that's fascinating because I'm sure there are lots of writers who, yeah, they can create this whole world and write in that space and visualize everything. And so
Yeah.
it's interesting how like our different limitations also become an asset because we have to get creative about how we're gonna get around them and that kind
Yes.
of thing. So So you've got two books, that's June, right?
June, yep.
And then you've got another bake shop in the summer,
Another bake shop in the summer.
and then another in the new series in the fall.
Yeah,
That's a lot. So
it's a
I'm not
lot.
going to ask you whatever else you're doing because that's funny.
I know.
I usually end with, so what else do you have coming up? And it's like a whole heck of a lot. So
I know. I do have a lot. I have a couple projects that I'm working on, but they are not ready for publication
yes,
yet. So,
yay.
yeah.
So how can people find you? We mentioned Instagram and Facebook, but you go ahead and say those again if they can find you on a website or anything that
Yeah.
let us know how they can find you.
They can find me on elliealexander.co, not com, co. And all of my social links are there too.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm actually going to pop back in. I mean, that was usually what I asked somebody at the very end, but someone in the audience just posted a question, and it's a good question. So we'll make sure and do that before we jump off. This is from Sarah in the audience, and they asked if you have any advice for a novice writer who has finally come up with a story idea and doesn't know where to begin.
Oh, yes, Sarah. It's always the beginning, right? I would want a follow-up question because she says novel or they say novel. Is it a mystery or is it something else? But if it's a mystery, my tip is start with the body, and work your way back from that. If it's a novel, start with wherever the story wants to take you. But I think a few of the most important things that you can do when you're first starting to write is go to the bookstore, your local bookstore, and figure out where your book belongs on the shelf. Like, what else is it like?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then grab two or three of those books that are in the same vein, genre, tone, and read them.
Yes. Yeah.
And read them not just from the lens of being a reader, but read them from the lens of the writer this time, and take copious notes and really start to break down like what those other writers and authors are doing.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a little bit of, I'm gonna hang on just a second because there's a little bit of a delay between the Zoom that we're on and the
Yeah, yeah.
YouTube. She did say that she thinks it will be a cozy mystery.
Okay.
So yay, that's cool.
That's
I think the
awesome.
other thing that I um always want people to know is like, especially when you're starting out at the very beginning, is read advice, listen to people who are ahead of you, but don't etch that in stone
Hmm.
because every single person has their own way in. Um, Lanny Taylor actually talked about this a couple weeks ago on her Instagram because she talked about how people say, "Oh, you got to write the crappy first drafts. Like that's just how you have to do it. That's the only way to do it. You've got to write your crappy first draft and then you start editing." And Lanny said, "If I did that, I would have never written a book."
Mm-hmm.
Because
Yeah.
for her, she has to write a chunk and then she comes to it the next day and she edits that chunk and then goes into the next chunk and then so on and forth. She's like, it has to be clean in my mind, like I can't. So like take in advice, read writers advice, hang out with writers, take encouragement from them, but don't feel like any one piece of advice is absolutely the only way to do it because everybody's going to find their own process and you just have to kind of trust it, which is freaky at the beginning, but you you have to kind of trust that you're going to figure out what works for you.
Yes.
So
It's so interesting because, I teach mystery writing, and I always say to my students, like, if somebody tells you that this is the one and only way to write a book, run as fast as you can
yes.
because so much of it, and even like, you can have the structure and you can learn that plot and some systems and everything, but everybody always makes the process their
Yeah.
own. You
Yeah.
have to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because if you don't, then you're just, it will never quite work for you.
Yeah.
It's always going to be a struggle. And don't worry if it is a struggle some days because everybody goes through that. Like
Yeah.
I have days where I feel like I'm squeezing a rock and trying to get blood out of a rock. It's
Yes.
like, come on, you can do
I
it.
know. That was
And
today
it
for me,
doesn't mean you're
actually.
not a good writer. It just
No.
means it's just not coming that day, and that's okay.
Uh-huh. It's true.
But so thank you for your question, Sarah, because that was fun. And definitely look at Ellie's website because she offers coaching. Um, but also look up, I know that I don't know where you are, Sarah, but there's the Sisters in Crime
Yeah, I was gonna say
groups
that too.
that meet that just like help encouragement community. I think honestly for most writers, not for all, but for most writers, having a community of other writers because they're gonna get the struggles in a way that maybe your family or your other friends aren't quite gonna get. And then it's nice to have that support and encouragement. So yeah, definitely seek out other writing groups. If you can find people to be in a critique group, that can be a little dicey, but sometimes you get lucky and land on a good group of people. So yeah, definitely seek out support for that process because it's so much nicer to have somebody just say, "Oh, I get why you're having a bad day
Yeah.
or
Or
a
this
good
is
day."
normal. Like, yeah.
And and honestly, my writer friend, I mean, that's been what's so fun about working at the bookstore and then having all these writer people that I know is that I get just as excited about somebody else's book coming out if I
Yes.
have a connection to them as I do. In some ways, honestly, even more, because sometimes I'm a little bit ambivalent about my own stuff coming out because it's just a little weird. But when someone else's book comes out, I'm like, oh, that's so
Yeah.
exciting. So,
Same.
yeah, definitely find community because I think that is because it can be a lonely journey. I mean, you're sitting there writing in your own room or editing in your own room, and you don't always have people to kind of bounce things off of. So,
Yeah. Well, and one of the great things about a bunch of the Sisters in Crime chapters is they're doing Zoom sessions too. So you can
yeah,
even
yeah.
join a chapter if you don't have a chapter close to you. I know like the California Coastal chapter here in the Bay Area, lots of people from all over the country join, and I just
Yeah.
did
Yeah.
an event with them last weekend on Zoom.
Yay. Yeah. Yeah. That's definitely look that up. I'm sure they have a web
Yeah.
presence. So just
Uh,
look up Sisters in Crime. So, all right. Thank you everybody so much for watching. This has been super fun. Thank you, Ellie, for being here. Go find Ellie on social media and all that good stuff because she posts fun stuff. And yeah, we'll see you next week. We've got Elizabeth Teets. She is a local comedian and essayist in Portland.
oh.
And her focus in her creative work right now is women in comedy and film.
Ooh.
So she is the editor of a collection of essays called She's So Great that's about women in film and comedy. So it's like that is such a different thing, such a different topic. So I'm super excited to talk to her and just like see where that goes because I don't know anything about it. So it'll be fun.
Oh, I need to put that on
And
my
then the
calendar.
following week we have a middle grade author. I'm gonna blank. I think it's Kate Albus. I'm sorry. It's like my name went out of my head right when I was gonna say it. She wrote a book called Nothing Else But Miracles that I read last year that was really great. So I'm excited to talk to her. A little bit like jumping around in some genres, so that'll be fun. So anyway, join us and we will see you next time. Have a good night.